this is a pretty hot topic that we talk to a lot of clients every day about devices. I mean, if I take a bit of a poll, hold your hand up if you carry more than 2 devices, 3 or more devices, 4 or more devices, 5 or more devices, right? So it's not uncommon that we have a lot of different devices. Devices are everywhere that we go. It was interesting, a couple of weeks ago, I was traveling. I took off for a meeting. I was an hour away from where I was. I thought this was going to be one of those quick and dirty meetings. All I did was take a notepad and a piece of paper with me. Got caught up a little bit. I needed some information right away. I'm like, okay, what do I do? Didn't see a internet store around where I could go borrow someone's computer. I just walked into a store. I said, give me anything you have that surfs. The person looked at me and said, what model do you want? I said, I don't care. What do you have that's cheap, that has Wi-Fi and a browser? $99, I got some device, connected to something quickly, pumped out that piece of email I need to do. I quickly looked at a PowerPoint, gave someone some feedback. I pretty much threw the thing in the garbage after I was done, right? That 15 minutes was worth 99 bucks to me, right? And that's the way the world is going, right? We need information, we need to solve a problem right away. And at the end of the day, it's really about having any device that can get me on the internet, that can get me the piece of information that I need. All these devices are great, but they're also bad. We live in this double-edged sort of, maybe sometimes devices are too close to us, right? We use them everywhere we go. We have a joke with friends when I see someone leaving to go to the bathroom and they have their BlackBerry, their device on them, I always say, that person's going to take a number 3, right? Because they're sitting using their device. I see it all the time, right? So no matter where we go, devices are with us, but we want to get the best use out of those devices as we use our day-to-day efforts, right? So when we start talking about what people are doing with their devices, we also want to talk about what does the business want, the business being our end user community. And when we talk to those folks, and this is just a small segment of what we're hearing, users want transparency. They don't really care what the device is. They want to work the same way from no matter what location they are at and get the information that they need, right? They don't want a lot of rules. They don't want to have too many different things they have to do. They just want to get at the information that they want to use on the device that they want, right? And as Steve was saying, they want to use devices that are appropriate to them, right? Depending on where I'm going, whether I'm in the office, in a taxi, working from a hotel, I need to pick the device that's most appropriate. But I think that as we get on planes, there's less and less room on a plane. I can't really open up a 15-inch laptop anymore sitting in a seat when someone pushes their tray table back, right? Battery life is becoming an issue. We want smaller devices. So I want to use the device that's appropriate for where I am and what I want to do. And I don't want to be limited by these devices where possible, right? I also want what I refer to as follow-me file access. No matter where I am, wherever I go, I want to be sure the files that I need to do my job are coming with me and are going to be available on that device, right? At the same time, security is important to IT and important to the business, but from an end-user perspective, I just want it to be there, right? I want the IT department and the policies that we put in place to be secure. I want to assume it's secure, just like I want to assume I have power, right? I just want it to be there. And at the same time, I don't want to spend an awful amount of time logging in, because a lot of us have a lot of different applications, and if I have too many different systems that I'm leveraging, I don't want to log into this and log into that, because then that becomes a bit of a hassle factor, right? So at the end of the day, I just want a consistent experience no matter where I am, no matter what device I'm on, right? And let me just do my job. I don't want to focus on the technology that I have. And on the other side, from a lot of the IT folks in the room here, what IT is asking back of the business or the user community is, please help me devise this bring your own device strategy, right? I can't do it on my own. I need to get some input from there. So we want communication between IT and the business to figure out what that strategy needs to look like. And from an IT perspective, we really want to leverage policy as much as possible, right? Tell me what we need to protect on what type of devices and when, right? So we need to collaborate with each other to figure out what policies that we need to adhere to, because that's going to determine what tool sets we potentially are going to use, what devices we're going to use, and what restrictions we're going to apply to everybody. All right, so that's we have to work together. And IT also doesn't want to have 900 tools. I think that we all have lived past the best of breed solutions. We can't sit there and keep adding and adding and adding to our tool set, because that introduces complexity and cost, right? So as much as we can, let's try and standardize on the tool sets that we're going to support. But at the end of the day, it's about data, right? So what we're trying to have users get access to is that vital data. So the impact of this whole bring your own device to work, we need to look at what does that do to us day to day. I mean, if I do nothing and just let things run status quo, I'm going to stand still, and there's a parade that's going to walk in front of me. I'm going to watch it happen no matter what I do, right? So if you have no strategy, if you have little strategy, if you're working on your strategy, your users are doing something in the form of these mobile devices. If I only say I'm going to allow you to do X, Y, and Z with my device in my way, you have to be careful that now they're going to go around you, right? So if you start locking things down too much, if you don't supply that choice, if you don't supply options, they're going to find a way to get around it. Your users are doing that today, right? So we have to be careful that our policies aren't so tight that the users are in a position where they need to feel they have to go around you to do their day-to-day work, right? At the same time, when we have too many devices and we have data all over the place, there's a big challenge when people leave organizations. Because people are leaving organizations with intellectual property, but then they're also leaving organizations with real property. They have data on a bunch of devices that may have been theirs or corporately owned. They could have been having data stores on SkyDrives and other devices. So how do I deal with getting that data back, right? So I got to start thinking about these challenges. If I don't have the right device strategy, that can have an impact on when my users leave or how my users are sharing information. A lot of folks, we start having these conversations, and they say, well, I'm just going to put out a virtualized desktop, my problems are solved. Okay. That's a good thing. Virtualizing desktops is a good approach to bring your own device strategy. It's not the entire strategy, right? Desktop virtualization is a great concept, but it relies on me remotely connecting in and leveraging my applications. What do I do when I'm disconnected, right? So again, it's a tactic. It's not a strategy. And then folks say, well, can I make this someone else's problem? Can I outsource this problem just like I outsource my data center? Sure, that potentially is there, but at the end of the day, you know your users best, you know your environment best, right? So you still need to be involved. You still need to be involved in defining the processes and defining the policies, right? So it's not something that you can just throw over a fence, right? So the impact is we want to be heading with our employees. We don't want to see them walking in front of us. We don't want them seeing them going around us. We want to do it with them. So with all of these challenges from the user side, from the business side, our own personal feelings, what's the goal, right? At the end of the day, the goal is to protect the data, right? Our biggest threat is what happens to our data. So what we need to focus is protecting that data. Right? So for me to protect that data, I have to think about separation. So I need to separate the data from me away from the device. Right? And that's what we've got to do when we're thinking about this whole BYOD strategy. When you're thinking now that the device has to be separate from the data, identity becomes a much more critical component, because you used to be associated to a device. That was Joe's PC. That was Bob's BlackBerry, right? If I can't validate the device, I got to figure out some other way to validate you. That could be certificates, that could be something else, but these are things that we've got to think about is, how do I prove you're you now? Because I can't prove it by the device potentially. So again, I got a couple of factors I got to think about. I've got you, I've got a device, And now I've got this other thing called a location, right? Because work is not something, work is not a place that you go. Work is something that you do. Right? So now we're going to talk a little bit about the best practices. Now that we've kind of thought about the devices, the location, the individuals, now let's talk a little bit about some of the things that others are doing, that we're doing with our clients to facilitate building this strategy. So Chris, I'm going to open up next few notes about how we go about some of these things.
Thank you, everybody. So I think the first step is really to understand what your end users are trying to accomplish. There are so many cases that we see where the conversation starts with, I have a phone and I want to use it. But what do you want to actually do with it? What are the real world scenarios that you want to enable? If the answer is, well, I just want to be able to get my email, that's a lot different story than I would like to be able to get dashboards and my sales forecasts. And that's also different from, I'd like to be able to do document management. So we need to really start with, what are we actually trying to accomplish from an end user perspective? And that will help to drive the overall strategy of what you're going to use these phones and other mobile devices to do. The other thing that really comes into play, I think, is thinking about the entire stack. One of the things that happens when we start looking at mobile strategies, we see the same thing with things like portal strategies and online strategies, is they're kind of a tip of the iceberg problem. The end user just wants to be able to have a view of the world of the enterprise, but in many cases the enterprise has other problems, whether it's security issues, whether it's data quality issues, whether it's lots of different applications within the enterprise internally. And in many cases, the IT department has simplified the picture by essentially shutting out people out of certain areas of the network, or by creating a fairly simplistic security policy in order to avoid having those conversations. So what happens is, the moment that you say, I'd like to add my phone to the network, you open up a whole bunch of other conversations that also need to happen. So let me give you an example as a story. So we have a client out west, and they came to us and they said, we would like to enable mobile access to our internal network. So the first problem was, they actually have two different ways to access the network. One is for internal staff and one is for external partners. So now you have to build a mobile strategy that handles both of those paths into the network. So one of the things that we're doing with them right now is we're re-architecting their entire perimeter infrastructure so that there's only one path into the internal network, whether you are an internal remote user or an external partner that just needs access to a Dropbox type of scenario. So that you have a more simple perimeter security infrastructure that allows you to be able to connect those types of devices into it. The other problem that they have is the way that they were running their kind of external access to the network was that every time that someone wanted to have access to the network externally, so from a bus stop or a Starbucks or whatever, they would actually create a whole new instance of the application and move it into a separate externalized network for those people who are coming in from the outside world. So just imagine the scalability problem of having all of these core enterprise applications like your ERP system, your CRM systems, your portals, your databases, and so on, where the first time someone says, well, I need to be able to connect through the internet on this phone, there's 6 months of infrastructure work in order to set all this stuff up. The other problem that they had is they had 1,500 applications and growing, and no one quite knew who owned them, where they lived, what the technology was, and so on. And so again, when you start talking about mobile strategies and being able to surface up those applications within a mobile context, it becomes a challenge when no one actually understands what the application does, who owns it, what it was written in, what technology it's based on, and so on. And so I think one of the things you've got to get your end users to appreciate is that in order to surface up applications within the mobile environment, it ultimately starts a conversation about how to simplify general level access to those applications for the enterprise. And in some cases, depending on who you are and the organization that you work for, in many cases you have very mature enterprise level architectures that allow you to do that quite easily. We have many clients that don't. I'm sure that around the table there are organizations around the room where the person wants to be able to get access to the ERP system, but it's kind of clunky and it's been around for 10 years and it's got this kind of weird custom security arrangement that's built into that application and it's not really tied into the Active Directory. It doesn't really work with Microsoft Office. And so all of that all those warts in the existing system get amplified when someone starts to talk about mobile. So you need to think about this holistically and to have a tie-in between what you want to do on the phone and other mobile devices and the entire stack. And then lastly, this word on the right, governance, which is kind of my area of interest these days, and an interest especially in the security side, is about who gets to decide what devices get access to what applications. Just think about that fundamental question for a little bit. Who gets to decide who has access based on where I am, what device I have, who I am in the company, and what application I need access to? The old days, when we had kind of very centralized extranet, thick VPN connections, was a simple one. IT decided. And you went through our pipe, and it was very restrictive, and there was a big long form that you had to fill out, and you had to have an application that met all this criteria, and you then got access to your application. So that model no longer scales when you're talking about many different applications in different formats and technologies, some of which are web-based, some of which may be mobile apps, some of which may be client-server applications. All of those different applications have governance implications. So what you need on top of a technology solution is a business strategy that allows you to set up some rules and regulations and policies around who makes those decisions now. And what we're finding is more and more the security team, who used to be the kind of gatekeepers to everything in the enterprise, need to feel comfortable about delegating some of those security decisions to the business. And that's a big shift. It requires the applications themselves to be more responsible for things like authorization to different areas within the application. It requires applications to be able to be agnostic between internal and external users coming in from the external internet side versus the internal network side. It requires those applications to be agnostic around which device you're using and so on. And so some applications that contain a whole bunch of enterprise data will be easier to move into this mobile space than others. And so as you kind of move into this world, you just need to make sure that you have that strategy that combines both some technology solutions, which Andy's going to talk about, as well as this kind of strategic and governance aspect to it. And to really work with your security teams in particular to ensure that they're comfortable with a new way of doing business around authorizing who gets access to those applications and or data through what devices and through what networks.
Thanks, Chris. One of the things that keeps me awake with respect to this whole user community with bring your own device strategy is around the mobility of the data, right? So how many people in the room today use one of these services, Dropbox, Gmail, iCloud, right? So if you're using it, all your users are using it, right? So when I'm communicating with a client and we get into situations where a client has a large file, don't want to email it, they just say, I'm going to give you access to my Dropbox, you can grab my file. This stuff gets a little scary, right? Because now your corporate data is going into environments that you can't control, right? So Dropbox, all these other services is not an Active Directory account, right? That account now belongs to that individual user. You don't know the username, you have no access to the password, right? It makes it challenging. right? I can't get that data back when the user leaves the organization. I can't control, I can't audit, I can't understand what that person is doing with respect to allowing access to others with the data that they're putting into these devices. And that concerns me. And then I've got to figure out, well, why are my users actually using these services? Are they just trying to sync data? Meaning that I've got 3 or 4 devices and I just want to be sure I've got all my data no matter where I go with my device? Or is just the backup? Like I want to keep my own copy of something, I'm hitting the road and I just want to keep a separate backup on separate other store because I don't want to carry around my little IDE hard drive that IT gave me to back my stuff up. Or my quotas are so too tight, are tight that I can't back them up because I'm running out of storage. Or do I just want redundancy? I just want to have a copy of everything everywhere because it makes me sleep better at night. These are the questions that we got to ask our users about why they're using these services, how they're using these services, and then figure out how to stop using these services if you feel that this is a risk to you. And most of the IT folks I talk to, this is a risk, right?
And just to reiterate Andy's point earlier, we do see this where users are going around your solutions in order to get this. So if you do not provide a solution that services that need, people are using Dropbox. The other one that comes up too is where you have internal and external vendors collaborating together that can't get through the network. And so, you want to be able to share stuff in the cloud for that purpose. So if you don't provide a solution that supports that kind of model, then they'll either use the vendor solution, which you may not want, or they'll use Facebook or Dropbox or SkyDrive or email as a solution.
Yeah, so I think about where the world is going, and the other one that scares me is Facebook, right? So there's a lot of your folks using Facebook today. Now what happens if people start storing their files on Facebook and people start tagging, hey, I like that payroll compensation spreadsheet that you have there. I think I'm going to use it, right? This is the stuff that concerns me, right? Facebook's a good app, but I worry that we're obviously blurring this line with the consumerization of IT. I just don't want to see the consumerization of your private data with everybody else in the world, right? So these are things that we have to think about. And again, if I don't talk to my users, I'm afraid to talk to my users because I don't have a solution for them, right? They're going to go around me. So as Chris mentioned when we talked about data, I've got to look at, okay, you got a device, you're out on the road, you're doing this and that, but what are you really doing with it, right? So when I start talking to users about, I need everything, no matter where I am, it's got to be this, I got to have this, I got to have that. Okay, but what are you doing, right? Because when I start asking more questions about what are you doing with the data, are you creating it or are you consuming it? Because for a lot of us with iPads and other devices, we're just consuming the data, we're not creating. We're just looking up some email, we're just looking at a file, we're just reviewing a PowerPoint. And if I start going a little deeper with what they're doing, then maybe I can adjust my policies. I can think about making stuff read-only or what have you, but we got to understand what are they doing, right? Consuming or creating. So when we look at the idea of access and what people are going to do with the data, again, it's all about breaking it down into smaller pieces, right? We have to look at who you are. Depending on who you are, I'm going to define what you get, read only, full access, let someone else get access to it as well. And then how much we trust that device, right? So I can tell what device potentially you're coming in on, whether that's my device or not. Does it have a cert? It doesn't have a cert. It's not my device, right? I'm going to call that an unmanaged device. It doesn't have one of my clients. It doesn't have something else I can validate, right? So I can inspect the device, figure out what access I'm going to give based on the device, and then potentially where, right? So you've got a Windows 7 machine with direct access, you're on my corporate LAN, you get everything, right? You're coming through on some other device through a connection pure internet, I may limit that change. More and more folks are even considering in their own environments, they're standing up maybe yet another public Wi-Fi that they use for their own consumer devices. So they just assume, hey, you're using your own device, it's not in this domain. We've stand up this other Wi-Fi environment that you use. I've got a little different policy than on my guest Wi-Fi network, right? So there's different things that we can do and talk to clients about, because where you are, you can be at work, but the device that I'm on, I'm going to have a different policy, because just because you're standing in my building doesn't mean you're secure. Because the device that you're on, to me, isn't secure. So I'm going to find a way to deal with that via policy. And getting back to identity management, I can't stress enough that if you haven't started thinking about what we in the world calls a roles-based provision, this is what you need to start thinking about. It's leverage your Active Directory for what you bought it for. Today, a lot of you are creating desktop images, right? So you're used to creating what people call the gold image. This is an image that everybody has access to. Everyone has Windows 7, everyone has Office, everyone has these 3 apps. And then everyone has a P drive, and then everybody gets access to an intranet. Well, that's a role, right? That's a group in AD. When I provision a user, I have a role that says, by default, I'm going to allow you access to these things. Then I may think about what else you do with that laptop. It's for the accounting department. Well, accounting department typically gets these 4 other shares and access to these other 2 apps. That's a role, right? The idea is we're creating groups in Active Directory which reflect access, so that when I am provisioning a device or when I'm provisioning that user, I am doing it by groups. And the reason I want to do that, that's good when I'm provisioning the user, but it's great when I'm de-provisioning a user. Because when the user leaves the organization, all I have to do is take them out of those groups. I don't have to go figure out, well, I think they had access to this and I think they had access to that. From an auditability perspective, and a clawback perspective, it makes my life a whole lot easier. So moving forward from a best practices perspective, start thinking about a roles-based provision, because that's going to help your onboarding process, and that's going to also help your BYOD strategy.
So just to kind of go back to that, just a couple points here. One is, make the business responsible for defining what a role is. The business has to define what it means to be a project manager in your company, or an architect, or an engineer, or a marketing person. They have to be able to set the rules around what that implies in terms of access application. And then as an IT department, it's up to you to provide the services so that it makes it easy for them to provision those users. So just to give you a story, so we have a client where they don't have this. In fact, we're building this right now for them. And their process is called the like Bob process. Who has a like Bob process in terms of role provisioning? The way like Bob works is, I have a new guy, Dave, he's starting, and he needs to be like Bob. Can you please give him all the access rights that Bob has? And that's the way that they provision security. So it's a problem because the like Bob gets bigger and bigger and bigger because Bob accumulates all these independent security provisions. And it gets really hard because the alternative is someone's going to fill out a super complex form with 100 different applications they need access to and all these different devices and so on. So this is where it really helps in terms of if you can establish a set of roles that in many organizations are fairly a simple list. There's not that many different types of people within organizations. Then that allows you to template out all of the increasing complexity around what access rights, what devices, and so on that you get access to.
Great, thanks. So when it comes time to evaluate your tools, we mentioned this before, there's always a tool for something, right? Something happens, and we go, oh, we look bad. Let's go find a $99 tool that's going to make sure that doesn't happen again. Then something happens, and let's make sure that doesn't happen again. Let's download this freeware tool and make sure that doesn't happen again, right? At the end of the day, we end up with 200 tools running to make sure that doesn't happen again. And then Bob leaves, and Bob was the guy who picked 120 of those tools, right? So we don't know what's going on. So when we look at these tools, we have to think about not buying too many of them, thinking about what's going to be the best value for us. But we have to think about what policies are going to be there, because policies can be set, again, by the device, by the location. We have to be sure that we can apply the right policies with the tool set that we're looking at. We also want to be sure that those tools can provide some degree of isolation, such that I have to understand if I am using that device from an internet connection, I want to be sure that maybe that connection is isolated from the users who are in the office. right? I want to understand what zones people are going to have access to, and I want to be able to keep crowd A away from crowd B where possible. And ensure that when the access component is set up, that it leverages my Active Directory investment. I do not want to start creating subset categories of other permissions and other grouping that I have to maintain. That is going to be a nightmare, right? So we want to leverage that Active Directory investment that you've already made today so that we can use those groups, apply these policies so that we can isolate our users appropriately. When it comes time to build a policy, again, Active Directory, we want to focus on what that experience is going to look like at the end of the day. I mean, I've seen some people write some pretty neat policies, but when it comes time to execute them, the end user community says, whoa, this is too much, right? I understand what you're trying to achieve, but this isn't usable. I'm going around you now, right? There's no really such thing as one policy fits all, or again, internal versus external. There's other situations that may change that. The other thing you have to be careful, there's political things. I mean, a lot of folks in IT have seen it before, create great policies. This is the way it's going to run. It's good for everybody. And then a VP comes down and says, hey, I just went to Best Buy and I bought this and I'm going to use it. Says, well, I'm sorry, Mr. VP, that doesn't fit in our policy. What was your name again? Right? So at the end of the day, someone is going to get to go around the policy. Right? So we just want flexibility, and we have to keep some of these exceptions. Obviously, they're going to come up, but we obviously want to limit them. But politicalness or your status in an organization can potentially change some of these decisions. The other thing that I talk about is, like everything else, we have to justify every project that we do. We have to ask somebody for money. Not everything, your time, all of these things cost money. They have to then come, even if you're an organization with lots of money, and I'll be over there to talk to you after the event if you're around. There's still time, there's still priorities, right? So you've got to compete for all of the other projects that you have on board. So when we start talking about bring your own device strategies, we want to tie it to some other pain or some other projects that you have going on. So that's why we talk about what's your business continuity plans, what's your DR plans, what's your snow day plans, what's your work from home policy look like, right? So take these elements, right, that we are working with and try to apply them to a bunch of other initiatives that you have so you can spread the love and spread the costs, right? So that's something that we do spend quite a bit of our time with folks saying, okay, where else can we leverage some of these wins through the organization? And this is going to go a long way to get this project approved, either by dollars or in the queue of everything else that you're competing with. When you do start building up these policies, you've got to look at what support you're going to offer. Because at the end of the day, your user community needs to have their expectations set, right? So today it's, I'm going to go and buy whatever I want, you're going to do what I want, I'm going to bring Joe and IT a cup of coffee or a latte, hey, can you do this for me, hey, can you do this for me? I mean, we're going to start having too many of these exceptions. So we want to set the expectations of what we're going to do and support the end user community. So we may say, for instance, you've got one of our approved devices, that's 24/7 support, called a help desk anytime. You're carrying one of your own devices, well, maybe we only support that 9 to 5, or this is how far we take it, right? We need to communicate to our users what support at what times and how far we take things. Some of you say, bring your own device, bring your own problems. You know, here's configuration, you guys deal with it, we don't support you. That's good. You've made a stand. You've communicated what your policy is, right? So we just want to be sure that everyone level sets the expectations about what we do with this stuff. As you go and start talking to users about what they're doing with it, all of you have keeners. Like, you all know the half a dozen people who are buying the latest, greatest, who are coming to you, can't we do this and can't we do that? Start collecting how they use the device, what scenarios that they're using, such that you've got use cases. So that way, when you start writing your policy, when you're trying to figure out your policy, some folks will start with, here's the policy, and other folks, well, here's the way they're using it. Okay, now I better understand how they're using it. Here's where I see the holes, here's how I'm going to apply my policy. You got to do two ways. Some folks are good at thinking the policy, other folks are good at finding the holes in the way users are doing it. At the end, as long as you're building policy, great, right? So use your keeners, use how they're leveraging the devices today to help build up that policy that you're dealing with. That's going to help build a checklist. For some of you, you need to also potentially think about liability, right? Because the device itself isn't mine as an individual, isn't the corporate data, right? It's that whole thing about company cars. Years and years ago, folks gave people company cars. They got to drive them wherever they want. They got into 4 accidents. Hey, it's not my problem. That's a company car. Company insurance starts skyrocketing. They see the liability. They start clawing back company cars, right? So we've got a little bit of this thought process now with phones. So if I let you use your phone on our system and someone has a breach or you've got a WikiLeaks or something else that goes on, where's the liability factor, right? So these are things we need to think about. These are things that we need to document. And these are things that we need to communicate back to our end users, right? For some of you in certain professions, that liability could be higher than others, right? So again, it's just stuff to think about. And that's why we're all sitting in the room today, is to just have dialogue and think about what's going to be a priority after we leave this room today. When we talked about the tools, again, having all of those devices, I want to limit the number of screens I can look at. There's lots of really cool tools out there. There's lots of things that do good, provide us good results, but I can't stare at 55 screens a day, right? So I want to limit the number of consoles that I look at. More tools, more complexity, more things that can go wrong. How do I take advantage of maybe some of the tools I already have, or collapse 4 or 5 tools with one new one, right? Because I can't stare at a lot of consoles. Communication is key, right? I've seen too many times an incident happens, it's bad, they're going to try and scold that individual about why they did X, Y, and Z. And the user's easy answer is, well, I didn't know I could do X, Y, and Z. It's not documented in HR policies. It's not documented in usage policies, right? So now's the time, as you build your BYOD strategy, to go back to those policies that you have in your HR manuals or however else you go about it, and address these things about what people can and can't do. Because if it's not in their guide, you've got nothing to go back on them if something becomes a major issue, right? So it's all about communication.
I would say also on this front, the more proactive you can be, the better. Just what is traditionally IT's way of communicating? No, you can't do that. No, it's not in the policy. Very reactive kind of communication. You've got to think about change management. You've got to think about training. You've got to think about rolling out this as a program in a way that you can actually sell the value of enabling all these devices to your end user population. Then we all look like rock stars. We look like we're supporting the business. We look like we're enabling business value, as opposed to just being the gatekeepers that are limiting access, limiting the ability for people to do work, and so on. So the more proactive you can be, the more upfront you can be, and think about how those end users are going to react to being able to now do all of these new things, and how that communication happens is super important.
Leverage your HR departments, right? So from that perspective, this is an easy thing for HR to understand, right? The other thing is, we as an organization are devising our BYOD strategy. We would like you to stop doing this now, or please do not continue doing X forward, because we are going to have something for it. What you need to do today is to continue doing this. Again, start some communication, get HR involved, make them aware of what's coming up, right? So that they don't start adding more and more of these Dropbox accounts or whatever, if you've got something that may be a solution coming forward, right? As we talked about setting expectations with our users, we have to think about what impact it's going to do to our help desk, right? Am I going to now taking more help desk calls, right? How much am I going to handle at help desk, and what will help desk cover off, right? So we need to think about what changes to my help desk team or support teams that we're going to deal with that. And who's going to provide training? Right? So if we're now going to support device X with these use cases, with these policies under these conditions, who's going to communicate that? Is that the training team? Is it going to be posted on the extranet, intranet in our environment? So we need to decide who's going to facilitate that communication. And while you are planning this stuff while you are trying to spread the cost and the results through the organization. As early as possible, you want to think about getting that budget asked for these initiatives, because it's top of mind. This is not a difficult thing to explain to IT, right? This is easy for folks to get. I don't have to explain the values and the pains and the results that come out of this thing. So get budget early. And what's really important is get a proper feedback mechanism. When it comes to people with their own devices, they're going to be well to give you their input. Just have a way to collect it all, because that's going to change maybe some of your use cases. That's going to make you adopt what you thought was going to work, tweak it, and then from there you'll see success. So as we're rolling out, we want to pilot this thing, get it working, make some tweaks, success, move on to the next piece, right? You can't do it all at once. You're going to do it in pieces, and you're going to waterfall this thing in. You're just going to add this functionality, make an adjustment, add this functionality for whatever you're comfortable with, right? But like all projects, you want to understand what success looks like. You've talked to the end user community, you understand the business concern, you understand your own department's concern around security, you validated your use cases. This is what we believe success is. You know, we're all there at the end of the day. What I strongly recommend up front is that you capture metrics, right? So at the end of it, it's yes, okay, our users now get to do X, Y, and Z with X, Y, and Z devices from X, Y, and Z locations, but we also need to know how did we change their lives, right? So I need to know that they can now do this 5 times faster. It used to take us 4 hours to do X, I now do it in 20 minutes. This department used to have to do 17 steps, now I can do it in 2. You need to collect those wins, because it's good for IT, it's good for your career, but it's also good the next time that you go and ask for something. Hey, you gave us $50,000 to do phase 1 of my BYOD strategy. I've got these 5 departments saying they reduced this time, that time, this time, and that time to move forward so they could do their jobs better. I need another 150 now, right? So you've documented some success, and the whole ROI thing does not have to be complicated. The easiest way to capture ROI is just waste of time, right? It used to take me 2 hours, now it takes me 10 minutes. That's gold, right? Keep it simple with respect to your ROI payback with your end user community. Again, that success is going to get you the next bucket of money, because there is no such thing as I build BYOD, here's my strategy, I'm off on something else, right? You'll go on to something else, but that BYOD strategy evolves because the hardware providers are evolving, software vendors are evolving. This is a fast-moving industry that by the time that you're done, something else is going to come along that potentially could challenge your policies. Your users could start doing something different because they could only go this far before. Now you brought them this far, and now they're going to start pushing the boundaries. Our users are continuing to push the boundaries, especially with net new devices that come out in net new locations, with where they go and the things that they do with these tools. So when you are looking at this stuff, design it from the data out and look at it and test it from the user in, right? That's what we suggest you do when you look at these kinds of solutions. Start from the data, move out, go from the user, and then move in, right? And then somewhere in that middle is success land for all of us. So I'm going to go on and talk now a little bit about tools. Everybody wants to talk a little bit about technology. So we talked about some of the best practices and things that you've got to consider when you're looking at some of these strategies. I talked about reducing the number of tools that you use, making your investment in Active Directory something you think about more and more, and reduce that number of consoles. So I guess it's going back maybe 8 or 9 years ago. There was a story always changed over the years, the fish keeps getting bigger. But there was a Canadian who worked out of Seattle, the Redmond office, Brian Valentine, who got a little upset one day because he sent out this confidential email at Microsoft. And of course he did what everybody did in a confidential email. He wrote the word confidential in the subject line, colon, something, sent it out. And then he got ticked off because 20 minutes later it appeared on the internet, right? And he was upset, and he sent this email around. He's like, I can't believe that you folks are leaking this information. This is our corporate data. This is valuable stuff that we're supposed to keep inside the community. Please stop sending out confidential emails. This is hurting our business, right? So the next time that he sent out an email, he thought, okay, I'm going to capitalize the word confidential because that's going to make it more important. And he sent out his next email, right? And in that email was, like I said, he said, please make sure you don't send this out. This looks bad, all this other kind of stuff. That got posted in 11 minutes, right? So there's this frustration around how do I keep it confidential, right? So this product from Microsoft has been around since 2003. It's just, I'm surprised how many folks don't know about it. It keeps getting enhanced. So Rights Management Service is a feature in Active Directory now that allows you to lock down what folks can do with email and their Office documents. On top of that, as I discuss this, one of the reasons some of you maybe haven't deployed this product is you've said, well, there's no iPhone client, there's no BlackBerry client. Extending onto this, everything I talk about with an independent software vendor, GigaTrust, has added this little bolt-on that allows Rights Management Service to be used on any device. All right, so with Office Office files, I can actually set policies automatically, either based on the directory, a recipient group, and say every folder in the finance directory, every file that gets saved in there has an expiration date of such and it cannot be forwarded. Right? I can also be creating a very private spreadsheet that individually on the spreadsheet I can say this is going to last for 30 days and only these 7 people can view it and nobody can print this. Right? So either by policy or individually, I can lock down what folks can do with Office files, right? Such that they cannot, if they take that document, put it on a USB stick, upload it to Dropbox, whatever, only the right people still have access to it, right? And this is really key. This is a great way to keep stuff confidential. This is the kind of stuff that WikiLeaks and things like that are all about. Same thing for emails. By default, I can apply it to, based on a distribution group. I can have preset policies. When I just hit policy click, this policy A means do not forward, confidential. I can name the policies that are appropriate. Typically, a company will have 3 or 4 default policies, typically on the type of content that they produce. Allows me to send out an email. You will see in that yellow highlighted section that when I look at the email, I can automatically tell that it says, wow, this email is only for these people. I can't print it and I can't forward it. Right? So I can see right away that there's some degree of a policy on it. If I do go and open up that email on my BlackBerry, on my iOS phone, on my Android device, I will be able to see it. The nice thing about having Rights Management Service is we have a cache feature, right? So everything on your phone, there's an authentication component to it, right? So when you're on your phone, it is logged in, validating you to get that piece of email, right? So one question you're going to ask me is what happens when I'm disconnected? I don't have a LAN connection. You can actually cache these documents, say I've got a 24-hour cache or whatever time window you folks are going to be offline, meaning I've opened up a document on my machine. It cannot validate me back to the internet, but I have a 24, 36-hour, 48-hour time cache period where I can still have access to the file. But after that, it needs to validate who I am. It's going to do it quickly, go up to the internet, connect to you, yep, that's me, continue opening that file, or I can set a cache feature. If you are not using RMS today, I highly recommend that you look at RMS. It's a phenomenal tool. This will build extremely well with a number of your business groups. Easy to understand, easy to get, easy to implement, and it potentially is a great way for you to protect the data, as we talked about. And again, we have the ability to allow you access to all the content no matter what device you're on. Okay? So a lot of you folks today have a Microsoft Enterprise agreement. A lot of you will have that thing called a Core Cal. That's all the licensing I'm going to talk about today, because that's as far as I can go. So within Core Cals, you actually have access to run a product called System Center Configuration Manager. There's a new version of Configuration Manager coming out imminently in the next short bit. Configuration Manager is a tool that a lot of folks use to deal with the asset management, patch management, application deployment, desktop deployment aspect of their business. Hey, what a great product. If I'm already doing asset management, patch management, desktop deployment, application distribution, why wouldn't I just use it to manage my mobile devices? Right? Reduce the number of tools that I'm using, reduce the number of interfaces that I'm using. So within System Center 2012, I actually have the ability out of the box to manage Windows phones, Android, Apple, and Nokia devices. Now, limited functionality per se, meaning I can get inventory, I can set some degree of policy, and I can remote wipe that device. Well, guess what? That's 10 miles down the road than you have today, potentially, right? So those services are actually an element of Exchange. So if you run Exchange 2010, some degree of 2007 today, you actually have that capability. So that capability, you have that capability to drill down into a device and remotely wipe it today within Exchange. But what System Center adds is one console, one view, look at all my devices, click, and do this functionality. So out of the gate, a lot of you have access, a lot of you are running System Center. The new version will allow me to then deal with what I refer to as the life cycle of my assets, right? I can't control assets if I don't have an accurate inventory. So I'm going to be able to have an accurate inventory of all my PCs, my laptops, my slates, my mobile devices. I'm going to be able to apply policies to them. I'm going to be able to remotely wipe them. I'm going to be able to push applications to them. Right? I'm going to be able to do everything I can with one product, dealing with what I call the birth to the death of that device. And that's powerful. And that's why we can't recommend System Center 2012 enough. Moving on top of that, there is an independent software vendor, Odyssey, that provides a bolt-on to Athena. What's nice is it's simply an add-in into Configuration Manager. I don't have another console. I'm still in Configuration Manager. It's just another piece that gets invoked, which allows me a far more granular control of what I can do with that device. So I got good control with what I did initially, but now I want to drill down a little further. So I add a snap-in from Athena, and now, for instance, for an Apple device, I can start going, I'm not going to read everything off, but I can go way more in granularity with what I can do from a control perspective of all my devices. This is BlackBerry, this is iOS, this is everything, right? I can go deep down into the policies. I can turn cameras off when you walk into my Wi-Fi. I can set what mail accounts you have access to while you're in my office on that device, right? So I've got a lot of granularity, what I can do now on all my mobile devices. And it's not, oh, I need to adjust my policy. I need to go over to that special tool over there. No, no. I'm going to live in Configuration Manager today because that's where I'm looking up the asset. That's where I'm patching it. That's where I'm pushing the application. That's where I'm adjusting policy. That's where I'm wiping it. I've got one console to deal with my mobile device management, right? I can push applications out to these devices now, same console, right? So now some folks are managing this much of the device, but if they want applications pushed to them, they say, can you go into iTunes and download the link client and then do this install? There's some degree of loss of control, right? So I now have one tool set that facilitates all these things I want to do with everything that I would want to do, from a lockdown, a push, a wipe. Okay? So I'll leave you with that there. Steve talked about Windows 7. Today, a lot of folks are not leveraging the investment they've already made in Windows 7. So the BitLocker to encrypt hard drives, BitLocker to encrypt USB devices. Right? So we don't want to forget the basics of stuff that you've already paid for, right? Protecting the data, we want to do in many different ways, right? So if that asset gets lost, left in a cab, whatever you want to do, at least we've got BitLocker to encrypt that drive. With Windows 7, we've got the ability for direct access. Again, if you've made a Windows 7 investment and you haven't run direct access, please seriously consider it, because it is a way that for the end user community, it's seamless. They'll get access to all the file shares, all the applications that they want to get to from a data perspective. right from their Windows 7 machine without having to log in again and run this and run that. Ease of use, I get access to the pieces that I need, leveraging all of the policies and all the things I've built into my Active Directory environment. I'm leaving out the Windows 8 slide. I'm going to bring you back in this room at some other point. We're going to talk about Windows 8. Windows 8 has a raft of new features in relation to mobile device strategy. But today, within Windows 7, if you're not doing it today, look at Direct Access, look at BitLocker. Like all vendors, Microsoft provides a cloud application for cloud-based applications for email, SharePoint, CRM, and also your web apps. Right? So when I am disconnected from the network and I want to run an Office application like Word, I potentially have the option to run a browser version of Word, a browser version of Excel. For some of my users, this starts taking away the concept of a formal desktop. Maybe they're okay running web apps because for what they do, they create 20%, they consume 80%. They may not need a full-blown machine. I can get down to a thin client or some other type of device where they can run everything they need to do in a browser. OWA 2010 is phenomenal. Public Web Access. Web apps within Office 365 are great. So Office 365 from Microsoft is potentially a great solution for you to minimize that which exists on these clients' devices. Because if there is no applications on the device and we are browser-based, then we are storing the data back in some place that you feel potentially secure about with policies that you're comfortable with, and this potentially could be a solution. Now, saying that, I talked to a lot of folks about Office 365, maybe the Dropbox replacement. So let's think about this for a minute. The problem with Dropbox is that I, as Andy, have an Andy guy at whatever I want.com email address that is not my corporate address. I register with Dropbox, those files are mine. IT doesn't know my email, IT doesn't know what I'm doing with it, it makes a challenge. I come to you, say, I need some kind of corporate solution, you don't have it. I'm going to Dropbox, I'm going to iCloud, because I got an iPhone, I'm using this other service, right? You haven't given me a solution. Some of you are going to say, I don't want Office 365 because I want to host everything locally, but think about Office 365 as your Dropbox replacement. One, it's Active Directory Federation service integrated, which means when I use a service, I don't log in again. I have a spot in the cloud that uses my corporate username and password where I don't have to log in again. So I'm giving a user a click, I give them a DNS entry, they click on it, their files are there, they can send them back and forth, and they can get access to in the cloud. If they don't have a machine, that Word doc opens up in the web app version of Word. I think this is pretty attractive for a lot of folks, right? So I can now claw back Dropbox and all of these other things that I can't control. A lot of you in your upcoming EA agreement is going to have some degree of Office 365 in there. There's a path to get there. So now I can leverage Office 365, not necessarily for those email features and those other things, but purely for the Dropbox, what I call private data cloud aspect, because it's federated. It's the same username, same password. So that when I provision that new user, as part of my provisioning process, I'm now giving you an Office 365 spot for you to put your data. If IT wants to replicate that data back to their own SAN, great, but you've got a process to deal with that. I can get access, as an individual, I can now get access to that, leveraging my Active Directory username and password, no matter where I am, as long as I've got a device in the browser. This is pretty attractive to me. This is pretty simple for me to set up. This is pretty simple for me to administer. So if you are considering how do I deal with the Dropbox iCloud, this is a great way to do it, quick and easy. So a number of you today use what I call SSL VPNs. Some of you have Juniper devices. Microsoft's got a device called UAG, similar concept. We like the concept. Not much of a client on the desktop. They hit a button, they log into their Active Directory, and they get some presentation of applications to run, including file access. But then folks will say, well, I can't do it on an iPhone. Well, you can. Again, a lot of these independent software vendors are writing little bolt-ons, little add-ons to Microsoft technology so that you can use the same tools you've already invested in to get access to those files and those applications on that iPhone, on that iPad, right? So we're seeing a common theme. I already have a lot of this Microsoft technology today. I already have access to this Microsoft technology, but you decided not to use it because there wasn't something for iPad, there wasn't something for BlackBerry. Well, there is, right? Yes, it's going to cost a couple of bucks per user to add it on to what you do today, but that couple of bucks has to be way cheaper than you going and standing up a complete brand new tool that you've got to figure out and try to make it work. And then I'm doing it this way when I'm here, and I'm doing it this way when I'm here. No, users aren't going to put up with that, right? So how do we just take something good that Microsoft has, tweak it with a little bolt-on to make it great, right? So leverage the investment I've made today, just add a little bit more to get what you want at the end of the day to get full functionality to your users. So if you have a clientless VPN SSL type solution, the vNext bolt-on allows your UAG to run on an iPad or the other devices that you carry today. Hot topic, desktop virtualization. And it means different things to different folks, right? So a lot of folks, like I said before, are thinking, well, the way I'm going to kill my BYOD concerns is run virtualized desktop. Again, tactic, not a strategy. It's one element of the overall solution. Microsoft partnered with Citrix. The whole VDI in a box is a great solution. Allows you to basically put a simple client onto any of your devices, iPad, Android, whatever you want to run BlackBerry, and it gives you the ability, hit the connection, logs in with Active Directory username and password, and presents you with a virtualized desktop. Right? That virtualized desktop reads your Active Directory profile. You now have published applications to run Word, Excel, that ERP system. You're in a sandbox environment. You've got a connection from you back to your infrastructure environment, runs those apps. But again, when I shut off, when I'm disconnected, I don't have those apps local, right? Tactic, part of the solution. Desktop virtualization is certainly, like I said, it's hot. But again, it's one element of the solution, and you have the ability to run it from any of these devices that your folks have out today. So today's conversation is about having more conversation, right? So we talked about a lot of different things to make you think about what you're going to do with your BYOD strategy. There isn't a silver bullet. Like I said, a lot of folks think that desktop virtualization is going to solve their problems. Maybe some folks there are because they think their problems are here. But I hope you see today that it potentially looks like this, right? It's not a bad thing. It just means there's a number of areas that you have to consider and say, you know what? We're going to chunk off this much right now, and we're going to communicate to our community this is what we're going to support. But you've got to get started with a strategy. And today's session is really just about engaging in this conversation, trying to make you aware of what maybe some other folks are doing, things that we're doing, and some other thoughts that, we need to talk to our end user community because there is no one size fits all. Like Chris.
So I think I'd like to end by just going back to the kind of concept that you need to think about the holistic enterprise and how that is impacted by those devices that are coming into your world. And as we've talked about for the past hour or so, it's not simply a solution where you can buy an appliance, plug it in, and you're good to go and you can kind of wash your hands of it. Because it opens up other conversations around how these devices are going to be used to access different types of applications and in different contexts. And so you need to have conversations with those business users to understand how they're going to actually use those devices. So a lot of what we do as a company is work with organizations like all of you work for, to facilitate those conversations, both with you as IT users, as well as business users within your organization. And we work with you to ensure that you've thought about and have solutions to deliver that will meet the expectations of those users that are coming to you and saying, we want to be able to use our phones and our mobile devices and our laptops and so on. And hopefully, as we conclude the talk today and we open up the floor to questions, we've opened your eyes up a little bit in terms of looking at some of the different issues and challenges, as well as opportunities to enable these really cool devices within a corporate setting or within an organizational context. And to be able to make the right balance between security, compliance, policy, control, and user enablement, and being able to allow people to do things a lot faster and easier in the world that they're now accustomed to being in.